Hello, my name's Clive Smith and I'm a patient with severe hemophilia A. Today I'm going to talk to you about my experience of living with hemophilia and also how I've managed to change my life through sport. The destination for our talk today is July 2014, when I became the first person in the world with severe hemophilia to complete an Ironman, when I completed Ironman Zurich. Since then, I've completed 3 other Ironmans, and I think over 6 or 7 half Ironmans as well. And so I will talk to you about my journey and how I got there. I was born in 1980 and I am the youngest of twins. I have an older brother who also has severe hemophilia A. My older brother was tested for hemophilia as a result of a comment that my grandmother made to my mother before he was born. She knew that what would have been my great uncle had bled to death when he was around 2 years old. That was probably around 100 years or so ago now. So even in the UK, there was no real treatment for haemophilia then. But because of that, we knew that there was a family history of haemophilia, or at least severe bleeding in the family. And as a result, my older brother was tested when he was born, and he received a diagnosis within a couple of months. When my twin brother and I were born, we were immediately tested, and we received our diagnosis within 2 weeks. And so my mum had 3 boys, all with severe haemophilia A. We grew up near Windsor. Many of you may know Windsor Castle, and I grew up not very far from there. And we were all treated at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, which was an hour away in the car on a good day. It was a lot longer on a bad day with bad traffic. And some days we would be there more than once, because one of us would have had a bleed in the morning and another of us would have a bleed in the evening. And so we would get home and immediately go back. And that was at a time when treatment was on demand. We didn't have home treatment either. And so every time there was an issue with any one of us, then usually, unless it was at night, sometimes my dad might stay at home with 2 of us, but it meant a trip for all of us to the hospital. So it's tempting to say hospital became a second home, but I think sometimes actually the hospital was our first home. In terms of treatment for all of us, and in particular me, we were on-demand treatment for the first 10 years of life. I had most of that was going to hospital, but from about the age of 4 or 5, my mum then learned to do home treatment and inject us all. And so it meant we could do treatment at home, which was a huge change for us in terms of just being able to lead a relatively more normal life and spend less time at the hospital, more time at home, more time going to school. At the time, I had 2 target joints. So one of them was my left elbow. So I can't touch my shoulder, for example, on this side. As you can see, my left hand won't go as far down. And also my left ankle. I also had some bleeding into my right ankle, so the range of movement in that ankle isn't perfect either. Because of the amount of time I spent not walking on my left ankle, I have an imbalance in the muscle of the 2 legs. So when you look at my 2 legs, you can see that my left leg is smaller than my right. Between the ages of around 7 to 9, I spent a significant amount of time either in a wheelchair or on crutches, and that was how I went to school. I went to school as much as I could. I very rarely missed school as a result of my haemophilia. My parents were very keen that none of us should miss any schooling at all as a result of our haemophilia wherever possible. And so that meant adapting and finding a different way to attend school when necessary. When I was around 10, so around 1990, the thinking behind treatment in the United Kingdom very much changed and was obviously changing around the world. Instead of responding and being reactive to having bleeds, the treatment paradigm became one of being proactive and trying to prevent bleeds. And so around 1990, my 2 brothers and I all started on prophylaxis, treating at home 3 times a week. And it was life-changing for me. I had already learnt to self-infuse when I was around 8 or 9 years old, so I was already giving my own injections. It gave me a huge degree of independence and resulted in a large degree of normality. I couldn't do everything I wanted to, so I couldn't necessarily run around and play football, but I certainly wasn't stuck in the classroom when I was at school. Even during break times, I was able to go out on the playground and kick a football around occasionally, but just be normal and spend time with my friends. My hemophilia certainly became easier to manage. I was thinking less and having to deal less with my hemophilia, which was helpful. It meant I could focus more on school and just being a young boy, really, and just playing and doing other things. In terms of treatment and exercise generally, in terms of treatment choices at the time, the treatment was factor rate replacement therapy. And there were really 2 questions my parents had to answer, and that was, how often do you want to give it, and how much do you want to give? In terms of how much, that's largely dictated by body weight in terms of the number of units, and in terms of how often, it was either 3 times a week or every other day, which would mean some weeks 4 times, some weeks 3 times. So in terms of treatment choices for myself and my 2 brothers, it was relatively simple and straightforward. And I say that because I know there may well be people watching this, patients and indeed parents, who are daunted by the number of choices in relation to treatments at the moment. It's both a blessing and a curse having lots of new treatments. It's a lot to get your head around, but having the ability to choose is also something that we didn't have, certainly when I was growing up. I would see a physiotherapist as a child. They would monitor my joints. They would measure my growth and development, particularly as a growing, when I was in the growing phase of life, and make sure that my joints weren't deteriorating at all. In terms of sport, I played a little bit of football. I went to the gym. I also played a bit of basketball as well, which I really enjoyed. I don't really get many injuries from basketball. I fractured a couple of my fingers a couple of times, but in terms of any other serious injuries, I didn't really get many. It was a good way of keeping fit. Wasn't particularly dangerous either, so it was a relatively safe sport from that point of view. Having left school, I then went to university and read law, and then moved to London and started working and doing my training to become a lawyer. In around 2010, so when I was around 30, my wife had not long completed the London Marathon, which she ran for charity. And I decided to do a little bit of running with her near where we lived. We were living in southwest London at the time, not too far from Wimbledon, which you may know as well from the tennis. And so we lived not too far from there, and I started running with her 3 to 4 times a week. After a month or so, I had to stop. And when I say I had to stop running, I also had to stop walking. I, in fact, took a month off work and found myself for the first time in probably 20 years actually being on a set of crutches because I was struggling to walk. I was housebound as a result of this. In terms of work, I was self-employed, so financially it was quite challenging. And for the first time in a long time, I became angry. I became resentful about my condition, and I was incredibly frustrated because for the first time in my life, it was limiting what I could do. And for a long time, I hadn't had to think too long or too hard about my haemophilia. Despite all of this, I think most people with bleeding disorders are very resilient and don't like to fail or not succeed at what it is they're trying to do. And so I was determined not to be beaten by this. And whilst I was still only really focusing on my running, because that's what I wanted to get better at, I realized that a different approach was required. So instead of going over the mountain, I had to go around it and approach it from a different direction to the way most people might. And as a result of that, I started to introduce other sports to help with my fitness generally. I made 3 significant changes to my training. The first thing I stopped doing was running on consecutive days. And I found that that immediately helped because it gave my ankles and my joints and my body generally time to recover. Running is obviously particularly demanding and stressful on a body. It's weight bearing. And so it was challenging for anyone, even someone without a bleeding disorder. The second thing I started doing was treating on the days I would run. So if I was running on a Tuesday, Thursday, and a Saturday, I would always make sure I had my injection on the same days to try and then limit the impact and any potential consequences of running. And the third thing I did was I started to go to the gym. As I mentioned, I have an imbalance in my legs and indeed in relation to my muscles generally there. And so I spent about 12 to 18 months in the gym trying to level up those imbalances, which I found really, really helped. And in terms of the work that I was doing, it's not necessarily always the sexiest exercises. You're not throwing big heavy weights around, for example. It's sometimes the smaller repetitive exercise to build up the muscle more generally, and also just build up the ability for it to work for long periods rather than just maybe for 10 or 15 minutes. So to try and reduce the tiredness that was developing in my muscles. Following that work, I managed to progress to running a half marathon. I had a few issues along the way, a few normal running injuries, so injuries that wouldn't necessarily be as a result of my hemophilia. I had an issue with what's known as my IT band, which goes along the outside of your thigh. And my physio helped me with that, doing some work on that. I also worked with my comprehensive care team, and particularly my physiotherapist. We had lots of conversations about what I was doing, how I'd adapted my training. My physio would then make suggestions to me, which were really helpful. I'd then try them, and if they didn't quite work, we'd go back and have another conversation. But fundamentally, the reason why I was able to keep progressing was that between me and my physiotherapist and the team generally, we had a high degree of trust. I told them everything I was doing, and they were then incredibly helpful in terms of giving me advice. In terms of the gym, I was doing 3 strength sessions a week. I worked on my core strength a lot of the time, and also worked on building the strength in my left glute. Although the issue was in my left ankle, it had missed out the knee and worked into my glute in terms of the weakness. And so I found doing a lot of what's referred to as functional training was very helpful in terms of the running. All of that then led me in 2014 to completing firstly the Brighton Marathon, which I ran in 3 hours and 17 minutes. And then secondly, Ironman Zurich, my first Ironman, which I finished in 11 hours and 44 minutes. I'd started doing triathlon about 3 years prior to this. And the first year I spent doing a lot shorter distances in terms of the swim and the bike and the run. The second year, I then spent doing about 4 or 5 races, which were twice the distance. So what's known as Olympic distance, so a 1,500 meter swim, a 40-kilometer bike, and then a 10-kilometer run. And then the year before this, I'd actually completed 2 half Ironmans. So in the same way in the gym, you might progressively increase your weights. I was progressively increasing my distance, but over a year at a time. So I very much built up to this. I didn't just go from not doing too much or doing shorter distances to going into this. I kept just building up the distance each year to a stage where I then felt that this was achievable. In terms of running, as I say, the significant changes I made were not running on consecutive days and, of course, treating on the same days. I also had a shoe or a gait analysis on my trainers to make sure I was wearing the right trainers. My feet collapse in quite a bit when I run, which means I need to wear a specific type of trainer. Everyone will be different. So that was really important to prevent any injuries just generally from running. And then as well as that, in terms of the running that I was doing, I was varying it. So I wouldn't just go out and do long runs all the time. I would do shorter, faster tempo runs, sometimes what are known as fartlek sessions. Fartlek, I think, is a Swedish word which means playing with speed. So sometimes you might run really hard for 30 seconds and then walk for 30 seconds and then do the same thing. You might do that for 10 minutes, for example. And then I would do longer runs to build up my endurance. And then I might do some track sessions as well. So doing shorter, faster repetitions or laps of the track. So I varied my running quite a lot to try and help with my speed and endurance. In terms of cycling, that was the one sport I didn't really have to adapt to, but I did have a bike fitting to make sure, again, the same way as I had my shoes fitted to me, I had my bike fitted to make sure the saddle was at the right height, my handlebars were the right width. And that, I have to say, was really valuable because those sorts of things can cause injuries longer term if you don't get those sorted out at the start. Two things I always did in relation to my haemophilia. I always, of course, wear a helmet when I ride my bike, and also, I'm wearing it now, I always do, I rarely take it off, but I always wear my medic alert as well, so in case something happens and there's an emergency, somebody knows that I have a medical condition, they know to tell any healthcare professionals who might then need to treat me. The benefit I found from cycling as well is that my ankles after running would stiffen up quite a bit, and so by getting them moving when cycling, then that really helped to reduce the pain, because it was not just bleeding or hemophilic pain that you get sometimes, it's sometimes arthritis and arthritic pain, which I felt. So that really helps just get my ankles moving again and to ease the pain, and helps me walk more freely afterwards as well. In terms of swimming, I have very poor range of movement through my ankles. So in terms of kicking, I find that really hard to do. So I don't have much ability to kick in the pool. If anything, I find that my ankles slow me down. It's like my ankles are dragging behind me when I swim. And so I use a pull buoy between my legs to keep my legs more buoyant and keep my body at a better angle instead of dragging and sinking down at the back. I sometimes use long diving fins to do some kicking in the pool, which again helps my ankles ease off. So I use them less for my swimming, but more to help my range of movement with my ankles. On race day, when I'm racing, I'll nearly always be wearing a wetsuit unless it's particularly hot. So my legs will naturally be more buoyant in the water in any event. So I don't worry too much about not being able to kick when I'm in the pool, because I know on race day I'll generally be okay. Sorry, let me just skip back to that one. In terms of the gym, I've had to adapt what I do and how I do it. So when I do squats, for example, because of my ankles again, I may put plates underneath them so my heels are elevated, so that helps me when I squat down. When I do bicep curls, my left elbow doesn't like those, so I will move my arms and do hammer curls instead of doing normal bicep curls, and that helps the pain in my elbow. It doesn't hurt quite as much. And I know many people don't feel very confident in the gym, so I think it's important that when people do go to the gym, that actually you can adapt what you're doing. You don't have to do it the same way. In the same way I approach my running in a different way, I think we can adapt what we do in the gym to focus on our weaknesses and work out other ways of doing things. There are so many things you can do in the gym. I think we should focus more on what you can do rather than what you can't. In terms of training, in terms of what I was doing, 4 to 6 weeks out from an Ironman, my week might look something like this. On a Tuesday, I'd be maybe doing a 1-hour swim and then a 2-hour bike ride, and then with a 1-hour run, about 12 kilometers. Monday was always a rest day, hence why I don't mention Monday on here. Wednesdays, I would do a 1-hour bike ride into maybe a 30-minute run as well, along with another 2.5 kilometer swim. Thursday, I'd maybe spend 45 minutes to an hour in the gym, along with another 1-hour swim. Friday, I would then do another gym session and a 1-hour bike. On a Saturday, I would then do a 5.5 to 6 hour bike ride. So I was cycling pretty much the distance I would be doing, and then into a 40-minute run. And then on a Sunday, I'd be doing a nearly 3-hour run and a 1-hour swim and 45 minutes in the gym again. So over a Friday, Saturday and Sunday, I'd effectively be doing the distance that I'd be racing. And as crazy as it sounds, when I was training on a Saturday and Sunday, I wanted to feel tired because that's how I'd feel in a race. Hence why I always had my rest day on a Monday. So I was training in a tired state, which is how you'd often feel, obviously, on race day as well. So that was part of the practice for the day. In terms of what I've done since then, in 2019, I qualified for the European Duathlon Championships, and I represented Great Britain at those championships. I've completed, say, 4 Ironmans in total. My fastest was in Frankfurt in 2018, so I managed to take about an hour and a half off my first time in Switzerland. So swim of 1 hour and 10, bike in 5 hour 10, and ran 3:48 marathon at the end. My 5 kilometer time, my quickest now is 18:23. My 10K time is 37:43. And I've run, I think, several half marathons at 1:28. That's my fastest time. I still can't quite get quicker. Maybe one day I will. In terms of bumps in the road, as I've said, I had IT band issues, and I did a lot of stretching to help with that. I also had some acupuncture from my physiotherapist. I try and have sports massage once a month when I'm training heavily, and sometimes more frequently than that when I'm close to a race. I had Achilles tendonitis in my left Achilles tendon, which stopped me running for about 2 to 3 months before I did Ironman Frankfurt, where I actually still posted my fastest time. So I actually wasn't running until about 10 weeks before the race, and I still managed to get up to marathon distance, which I was really pleased with. The majority of the issues I've had have been sports related rather than hemophilia related. That's because I think I've had a good treatment regime, which has worked around my exercise, and also because I've worked really well with my physiotherapist and my treatment team as well. In terms of my treatment, I was on a standard half-life. I moved to an extended half-life 2 years ago, but actually all my Ironmans I completed while I was treating on standard half-life. So I've never actually completed an Ironman whilst on extended half-life. So it shows what can be done still by treating 3 times a week on standard half-life. In conclusion then, I have very much had to learn by experience. I still do many of the same things that other people do in terms of going to the gym, running, swimming, all those things. I just have to do it in a different way. I suppose my takeaway for anybody in terms of what you want to do is there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't still try and do it. It may just take you longer to do it. You may have to approach it from a different direction, but there's no reason why you shouldn't still reach that destination. And I'd say to anybody wanting to try and achieve in sport or indeed in anything else, that it will take patience, it will take persistence, and most importantly, it will take partnership. Although I crossed the finish line on my own, there was a huge team behind me. Thank you very much.
Clive, every time I hear you speak and I hear your incredible story, I'm just blown away, because it sounds like a story from a Marvel's movie, superhero story.
Yeah, maybe one day they'll make a film about it.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
So, but my first question would be, when you started to run, you probably talked with your doctor, your physio, or you just started to run?
That was probably a mistake. I did just start to run, and I probably should have had that conversation earlier. And if I'd had that conversation, I may not have got to the situation I was in. I was relatively fit at the time. I was still going to the gym and doing bits and pieces, but I wasn't doing specific exercises to work on my weaknesses. I was just doing general strength work, I think. So yeah, that would I think anyone listening to this should learn by my mistakes, and I think you should certainly have that conversation first, because you may avoid many of the mistakes that I made. But we learn from these things, don't we? So there we are, got there in the end.
But in UK you have really a comprehensive care in terms that when you go to your doctors, there is also a physio, right? And also psychologists, or how is it?
Yeah, so the system in the UK isn't perfect. So we do have, I think about 2/3 of centres in the UK don't have physio support and don't have psychological support. I'm very lucky to go to the centre I do in London at the Royal Free, where I do have an excellent doctor. I have an excellent, in fact, we have two physios. One of our physios was doing a PhD recently. So while he was doing that, we had another physio come to support the team. And now that our other physio is back, we've managed to keep both of them, which is brilliant. But we've been without a psychologist for a little while now, but we have just got a new psychologist in the last few months. So it's not perfect, but yeah, in an ideal world, then absolutely when I go, I see my doctor, I see my physio, I see my nurses, I see the psychologist, and anyone else I need to go and see as well, really. So most of it happens at one appointment. Sometimes I may have to go back for other appointments. So recently we did a scan of my ankles. We did an x-ray just to see how they're doing. And so that if I have any issues in the future, then we've got a reference point and we can compare them to how they were. And I know on the front of my right ankle, for example, I have a bone spur growing there, which is where most of my pain actually comes from now when I run from that bone spur.
Now, when you told your doctors that you're running, what was their reaction?
Initially, when I told them I was just running, their reaction was fine. I then had a conversation with my physio about saying that I wanted to do a half marathon, and he was relatively okay with that because he knew what I was doing already. But he did at that stage say to me, don't get any ideas about running a marathon. His view was that the human body isn't designed to run a marathon, let alone anybody with hemophilia. So when I did then tell him, I'm not just thinking of running a marathon, but I'm thinking of doing an Ironman, then he smiled and said, okay. He said, whatever you're doing, tell us and we'll work with you. And that was the best conversation I ever had with any of my healthcare professionals, because he didn't say no, which was really important. But he was giving me permission to try. And I knew that ultimately I might fail. But I felt confident and comfortable doing it because I knew I had his support. If he'd said no, don't be so stupid, I would have done it anyway, but I would have felt more concerned. But I think because we've always had that strong relationship where we've been able to talk to each other, then that really helped me. And that's why I finished by saying that it might be me that crossed the line, but there was a huge team behind me.
Mm-hmm. But before you started to run with your wife, when you were, walking normally to the office and stuff like that, did your ankle hurt you, or you were just walking normally?
No, I get low level amount of pain generally from my ankle. Some days I would limp a little bit if it was a little bit sore from if I'd perhaps done quite a lot of walking that day. So I've always had a few niggles and challenges with it. And certainly when I wake up in the morning, just getting out of bed, it's usually a bit sore and a bit stiff. So it's far from perfect, but it wasn't really causing me many day-to-day problems. So it was somewhere in between, really.
Mm-hmm. So I imagine that when you ran for the first time, it was horrible the next day.
Yeah, it was a little bit achy, a little bit sore. And I think because your body generally starts to ache a bit from the running, I didn't necessarily notice it as much as I might. But I was certainly mindful of it. Certainly when I started running, I knew that the biggest challenge was going to be my left ankle. If anything was going to stop me, that was it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But now, I think you're still running.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Daily? Or you do it daily, or you are still having one day without?
No, I think I would, if I was, when I run, I tend to run 3 times a week. That'd be the most I do. And then I'll cycle on the other days. I'm going to the gym quite a bit now, a bit more than I was. I'm not training for an Ironman at the moment, or even a half Ironman. And actually I had COVID back in December 2019. I had a really mild dose of it. And it was only when I went swimming about 10 days afterwards, I found that my breathing was really restricted from my lungs, and it took me about 2 to 3 months to get back to my lungs feeling normal again. So because of that, I reduced the amount of running I was doing, and swimming actually, and started to go to the gym quite a bit more. And because I'm not training for anything in particular at the moment, I am going to the gym a little bit more than I am running and swimming and cycling.
But do you have any, I believe that before you started to run, you probably had some X-ray and all that stuff. And if we compare it, you know, that ankle and now ankle, you know, did the you know, all this competition and running and cycling and everything, did maybe speed up some, you know, degradation of the ankle, or is the same, or it's
I don't think we've actually done a full compare and contrast of the old ankle and the new, really, but from my personal point of view, I certainly feel that the ankle is stronger. I think the more exercise I do, the less I bleed, and I feel stronger, happier, more confident with my ankle than I did before I was doing exercise. So I don't know exactly what the X-ray shows, but from my point of view, I feel that the ankle is a lot stronger than it was, and I don't have as many of the little day-to-day issues that I used to have as a result.
Okay, and my last question is, what are your plans for the future with your sports, with running and all stuff?
Good question. My plan was to run the London Marathon next year. Next year will be my last year as the chair of the UK Haemophilia Society, as I will have done 9 years, so I have to step down. But I found out a couple of weeks ago that the WFH meeting in Madrid is the same weekend as the London Marathon. So I obviously can't be in 2 places at once. I would still like to do a marathon maybe next year. I've only ever run one on its own. And I wanted to run London. London's a particularly special marathon. So I'm not saying I'm not going to run it, but I'm just trying to work out how I can be in Madrid and London at the same time at the moment. So okay,
great. Okay, Clive, thank you for sharing your story.
That's all.
Yeah, taking the time, and I wish you good luck, and hopefully, yeah, you will find a way to be in Madrid and also run in London.
Definitely, I might have to hire an aeroplane, but no, thank you, Ross. It's a pleasure for you to ask me to come and speak, and I hope everyone's enjoyed the talk, and I hope everyone's enjoying the camp as well. So thank you very much.